All right, so folks filing in, look for the open seats. It's definitely going to be standing room only, so folks coming in, find a space on the side, at the front. We're going to get as many people in here as possible. We're honored that James Andrews is going to be playing some trumpet music as people file in, and we'll get started at 2 o'clock.
Thank you, my friend. Well, all right, y'all, we're going to do it like Pableaux liked it. New Orleans style. New Orleans style, y'all, for Pableaux. And we're going to do a song called Down by the Riverside. I want everybody to join in and clap along. Gonna lay down my burdens down by the riverside. We're gonna lay down my burdens, study one no more. I ain't gonna study one no more, study one no more, study one no more. Study one more, study one more, ain't gonna study one no more. Thank you. Well, yeah. We're going to do it for the picture man. Pableaux. Yeah. All right. I'll do one more song, y'all. I'm going to do a song made famous by Mr. Louis Armstrong. It's called, Where You From? We're going to do a song. It's called What a Wonderful World.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. Can everybody with an open seat raise your hand again? There's a few more. Everybody else is going to be standing or sitting, and as the church fills up, you're welcome to come up here as well. I want to introduce Ryan Fertel, who's going to be emceeing the events today, and again, thank you so much for being here today.
Okay, please join me in thanking James Andrews for that beautiful tribute. Greetings, citizens. And welcome to the celebration of life for Paul Pableaux Johnson, or as several of its organizers have been calling it, the first annual Pableaux Symposium. My name is Ryan Fertel. There are countless ways to measure a friendship. Decades of being in each other's lives, meals shared over the years, days of conversations, occasionally profound, but more often as simple, though no less sincere, as a brief text message just to say, checking in. Time, food, fellowship, you likely measured your friendship with Pableaux in all of these ways. But if you are like me, you might also measure your time with Pableaux in all of the moments he saw you, looked at you through the lens of his camera. There are countless ways to measure a friendship, and as we know, Pableaux took countless photos of us, all of us, his countless friends. I have felt at times over my 20 years of knowing him like I was seeing the world from the viewpoint of Pableaux's lens. At his dinner table, surrounded by printed photographs, and not one, but, if you were there, 2 television-sized slideshows, I have seen his many circles of friends and family grow up, sometimes grow old, have witnessed those circles grow outward, like the universe ever expanding. I have watched through his camera this city rebuild and evolve. Most remarkably, I have seen a whole generation of children blossom through Pableaux's photos. Children arguably loved and understood Pableaux best. Transfixed by his constant motion, that trimmed Santa beard, his incomparable avuncular qualities. And I've had this conversation with several others that when we picture our friends' kids, we often call to mind photos that Pableaux took of them. His sister, Elaine, said as much after meeting my young son, telling us it's hard thinking of all the children Pableaux won't get to see grow up. But no matter our age, it's hard not to feel like Pableaux watched and recorded us all growing up. Especially if you were one of the fortunate many who received an out-of-the-blue text from him, containing little else but a greeting, yo-yo, a nickname, and a photo of yourself. Pableaux, as you probably know, was very much a nickname guy. The more absurd, the better. And over time, I couldn't help but keep a running list of all the names he bestowed upon me, some of which you might recognize from your own text conversations with him. Brother man, B-man, T-boy, my brother, boyo, boy chick, daddy man. Poppy, pumpkin, Dr. Pumpkin, professor, muchacho, dove, bubble, skeeter, shabadoo, my personal favorite, petunia, jabadonkus, grizz, weeby, chief. The photo that accompanied that nickname was often taken 10, maybe 15 years ago. A portrait of you in all your younger age glory. A reminder, perhaps, at other times of your more questionable choices in appearance and grooming. I might be speaking for myself only. Pableaux's photos, whether taken at a party or a parade, second line, or intimate family gathering, were always unmistakably taken by Pableaux. A head and shoulders shot, that is, a photograph with little to no context beyond a face. The face is a landscape, he said in one of the rare, if not only, interviews he taped about his life and work. All the little micro expressions that other people might not catch or understand, he continued. The goal is to catch people being themselves. I get as close as I can possibly be, he said. I get uncomfortably close. And it's been tremendously moving to witness how we, his people, his friends, his family, have reflected his big-heartedness and roving eye back at him, a person who, as we all know, often shunned the limelight, avoided the camera. How we have managed to get uncomfortably close with the fact that Pableaux will not take our picture, call us, feed us again. It's been moving to hear the outpouring of tributes shared by us, his family and friends, a small handful of whom we'll hear from today. In print, online, his presence has become inescapable. According to social media, it appears that everybody in this room, all 500 of us, have been eating nothing but red beans and rice and cornbread for the past 3 weeks. Chef raises his hand. Here in New Orleans, the place Pableaux called home and loved most of all, there's been second lines. There's, as I understand, an official city proclamation coming up. His table at Cherry Coffee on Laurel Street became a pop-up memorial filled with flowers, photographs, and of course, a 1-pound cellophane bag of Camellia brand red kidney beans. But I want to bring your attention to one tribute you probably have not seen. Every week, I've been honored to help Pableaux's sisters, Charlotte and Elaine, in picking up his mail, which, in one of his quirks, he did not receive at home, but at a P.O. box. This ritual has become my own private checking in with my friend. I walk into this shipping business, and on the right, there's a wall of little brass doors, hundreds of numbered mailboxes. And there on his box, number 203, is taped that now iconic photo of our friend. Pableaux has his camera ready. He's dressed in black, of course, and he has his head tilted. You've seen the photograph. He has his head tilted as if to say, "Baby, do you really want to take my photo?" "Rest in peace, Pableaux," it reads underneath the photo. "The Parcels family will miss you." Now, I can feel all of this causing great discomfort to Pableaux from the beyond. It strikes me every time I visit that something so small, so unintimate, so inconsequential as this tiny brass mailbox door has also become a place to memorialize him. But of course it has. Of course it has. Who else but Pableaux, who led such a large life, fed and photographed and touched the lives of so many people, so many of us. Who else but Pableaux deserves to be honored in ways both small and as large as this? Such a luminous and loving presence, a beautiful soul, a real character, who taught me and maybe you to embrace the uncomfortably close. A man armed with a skillet, a camera, and more friends than any of us could ever imagine. That's Pableaux. And we were lucky to call him our friend. Thank you. I'm going to bring up a few speakers next. We're first going to hear from Tony Blanco, Paul's brother, followed by, can you come up, Tony? Followed by Galen Dixon, Paul's college roommate, and then Dave Claunch, who is Paul's friend from Austin, Texas. We'll next hear from Ariana French, who was married to Paul. And before another trumpet break, we'll hear from Jessica Harris, who is Pableaux's honorary auntie. So here's Tony.
Hi. I'm sad. This sucks. I'm Tony. Pableaux was my brother. I mostly called him Paul. When I think of Paul, that image in my mind, the black shirts, the jeans, Doc Martens, big smile. He's always in the same outfit. He's got a closet like Fred Flintstone. He's carrying bags full of electronics or cameras or frozen chunks of gumbo. Ho, 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 gumbo claws. He's just talking to strangers. He's always making new friends. He was everybody's best friend. He was my best friend. We talked every morning between 7:30 and 8 a.m. And our mom, Carmelite, was also on the phone first thing every morning. As a kid, I would shuffle into the kitchen for breakfast and she's already up. She's sitting on the floor under this little cubby. She's on the rotary phone and she's talking to somebody just like him. She's building community, gabbing away. Just like Paul, when you talk to mom, she made you feel like you were the only person in the whole world. Not to say that he was perfect. He wasn't perfect. He didn't like holidays, except for Mardi Gras and New Year's. He was guarded, he was superstitious, he was willful. He didn't like being told what to do. He could be really, really prickly. He was ambivalent towards animals, especially pets. Like, really, bro, animals are soft and cute and you love them. It's just not that complicated. He was not perfect, but he was amazing. What was most important was that he just loved people. He loved families, and when you met him, he just shined his light on you and made you float on air. He was funny, and he was kind, and he gave of himself relentlessly, and he just wanted to be like mom. Like Carmelite, Paul wanted to give to his community. Those pictures he took gave him a way to show you not only how he felt about you, but just how beautiful he thought you were. Like Carmelite, Paul was here to listen and not judge you. Our calls were a space reserved to detonate in an unpopulated area. Like Carmelite, Paul made an active choice every day to reach out and see how people were doing. He used to say, it doesn't matter if everybody's not talking to everybody, as long as everybody is talking to somebody. And for many, Paul was the somebody that kept them connected to a greater web of the world. It was a long stretch where Paul and I didn't talk, where we were not close. And about 15 years ago, we had this meeting with the intent to rebuild our relationship. And I remember asking him, what's it gonna take? And he said, regular contact. We need to talk often about important stuff, but also we need to spend time together just hanging out. This is also really important. God. His death is a huge blow. We got so close in the last 15 years. I feel like I graduated from baby brother to little brother. He's been my support through very difficult life moments, and just as big, he let me have his back too. Most importantly, when we talked every day, we always made room for chit chat, nonsense. Our last call was the Friday before he died, and we spent 30 minutes arguing about the music of Phil Collins. He was wrong. And then we hung up. He took this little second. He was like, this is the stuff right here. These are the moments, little bro. I just love the time we get talking about nothing. It's so special. And I remember going like, okay, geez, yes, I love you too. There was just no subtext with this guy. And thank goodness for it. Oh, I miss him every day. But I do not regret. Even for a second, I don't regret. I know how he felt about me, and he knew how I felt about him. There was literally nothing left unsaid between us. And before I forget, our family really wants to thank Natalie Jordy and Brett Anderson, who met the sisters at Pableau's house on day one, and they've been available every day since. Sarah Rohan assembled and prepared all these speakers that you're hearing today, and she's been wonderfully supportive. And finally, we want to thank the bands and the musicians, oh, he's not there, and all the people that celebrated Pableaux in the place he loved most, of the streets of New Orleans. But one more thing. I heard a lot of people say in the days after that he died exactly as he wanted, you know, taking pictures at a second line, and it's just not quite, because I happen to know the exact death he scripted for himself. He used to remark on this brand of Johnson cement truck that would travel around the city. And in Pableau's vision, he's walking on the sidewalk, talking on the phone, not paying attention to the world around him. And as he steps off the curb, whammo, he's flattened by a cement truck. And he would say, somewhere on these streets, there's a cement truck with my name on it. So no, he didn't get the death he wanted. But what he got, you know, doing what he loved, surrounded by these people he loved, in the city he loved, this is just a blessed and fitting send-off for my favorite guy. I love you, brother. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Like a break in the battle was your part. Now we're back on the chain gang. Hello, I'm Galen Dixon. Like all of you, I'm Pableau's friend, and I was his roommate in college. Pableau's family asked me to tell you a little bit about Pableaux because they worry that since he was such a shy and private person, you might not know him very well. It was quite a turnout. If Paul were here now, he'd probably say something smart-ass like, boy, if I'd known I could get all you people together like this, I'd have done this a lot sooner. In 1984, Pableaux was still Paul. We were going to school in San Antonio. And while we all loved the fajitas and margaritas, Paul had to go a little further. His friend and bandmate Mark became Marco del Diablo, Mark of the Devil. He even named my old 66 Malibu La Puta del Camino, the road whore. And Paul began referring to himself as Pableaux. Of course, being the Cajun from New Iberia, he had to spell it Pableaux. And so the legend was born. Freshman year, our dorm rooms were about 2 doors apart, and a whole group of us down there quickly became close friends. But Paul, being Paul, very quickly expanded that group to folks all over campus. That elephant's child was insatiably curious. Even then, every new person he met was not a stranger, but rather a great story waiting to be told. We became roommates, though we weren't an obvious fit. He was the social Tasmanian devil that I was not. He was a musician and audiophile and loved jazz and blues and obscure bands, and I had heard of Billy Joel. He was not a fan of college football. He had no use for those arrogant, dumb jocks. And I was from Auburn, so I lived and breathed college football. Paul was a night owl, and I'm more of a morning person. But despite all this, Paul and I got along great, usually. And I learned to appreciate good music. Paul learned that otherwise decent people could be passionate about college football. And he even went on to write a book about tailgating, a cookbook on tailgating. But there were 2 areas where we meshed most closely. One was our off-kilter sense of humor. The other, and I think our strongest connection, was probably our arrested development. I see that so many pictures on the memorial website were of Pableaux with children, and both the faces of Pableaux and the children were lit up with joy. Small children just instinctively know when they've encountered a playmate on their level. Senior year, the infamous upstairs apartment on Rosewood, we had all the critical elements: a stereo, separate bedrooms, a cardboard box with a picture taped to it for a television, a decent-sized kitchen, and the interior steps leading up to this apartment were carpeted. Perfect for stair diving. To any survivors here today, my belated apologies. Now, don't get me wrong, life with Paul was no walk in the park. You don't get a personality that big and unique and interesting without some trade-offs. If any of you have roomed with him, you know. Our friends, including some that are here today, asked me on more than one occasion, "How are you able to live with Paul?" And I'd come back with some quip like, "Somebody's got to keep an eye on him." But truth be told, I can't imagine those 4 years without him. It'd be like going from color to black and white. Now, Paul's home was about halfway to my home, so I'd give him a ride, stopping the road whore in New Iberia, and that's how I met his family. And I came to love all of them, but I gotta echo what Tony said about Paul's mama, Carmelite. If you've ever experienced Paul's open door, open arms, warm kitchen, big table, and his boundless capacity to love folks, then you've met just a little bit of his mama, Carmelite. He and his mother both left us too soon, and I think maybe it was because their loving hearts might have been too big for their beating hearts to keep up with. A few years after graduation, in '91, I joined him on a road trip. On that trip, Paul was singing along with the radio, so I said, "Paul, I'm going to have you sing at my wedding." Instead of just saying no thanks, Paul decided he would smart-ass his way out of it. "Fine, but the only song I know the words to is Rawhide." If this were a multimedia thing, this is where I would cue the video on the Jumbotron of Paul in 1996 at my wedding singing Rawhide. So, who is Paul and who is Pableaux? I always knew him as Paul, but maybe it's a distinction without a difference. You all know that there was nothing fake about Pableaux, no artifice, no suit of armor or mask. Pableaux just gave Paul permission to put himself out there as the vulnerable, open, loving person he was born to be. It was his superhero identity, and his superpower was his bottomless well of empathy. Paul was always tuned into the feelings of other people around him. He simply could not help but notice and could not fail to act when someone was sad or hurting or even just looking new in town and in need of red beans and rice. There's so much to say about Pableaux and his dinner parties at Grandma's table and his life in New Orleans, but there are hundreds of you here who could say it better. I'll just say this about Pableaux's hospitality and generosity and gift for bringing folks together. In a world looking to pit us against them, Pableaux stood out as someone not just preaching, but embodying the message that there is no them, there is only us. Right now, it may be hard to do the Christopher Cross thing and think of Pableaux and laugh, don't cry, I know he'd want it that way. But actually, that's the easy part. Pableaux leaves us with a challenge. How can we stop meeting strangers and start meeting great stories we haven't heard? How do we help realize his vision of seeing that everyone is us? Audrey Petty, if you're listening, or if you're here, I apologize both for stealing your line and for butchering the pronunciation. Pableaux, toujours dans mon cœur, always in my heart. I love you, Paul. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dave Claunch, and it sucks to be here. There are two kinds of people in this world: those who divide everything in the world into two kinds of things, and those who don't. Paul would have laughed at that. I know that because he often did. It was a running gag between us. One of the many in this group text thread that Kevin Rue, Brent Spraggins, Paul, and I have had running for something like the last 35 years. The four of us became extraordinarily close in the early 1990s in Austin. Paul had come back from San Francisco and was working around the city as a graphic designer and a food writer. He spent some time in Oxford, Mississippi, though none of us can remember why or for what or when. When he came to Austin, he couch surfed quite a bit and then landed in the now infamous Harris Park Avenue house, first with our friend Brent, and later with another friend, Larry Romberg, and a few others. Sadly, Larry died of a heart attack just 10 days before Paul passed away. And Paul and I were making plans for him to come back to Austin for Larry's memorial service, which is, oddly enough, happening today in Austin. We'd had several calls that week, and Paul and I had both expressed our dismay at Larry's sudden death. It was very surprising and reminded us of our own mortality. So we have this group text thread between me, Brent, Kevin, and Paul, and it was legendary, at least to us. It was also remarkably and profoundly stupid. It was filled with idiocy. Just imagine 4 13-year-old boys making stupid jokes, telling dumb stories, commenting on current events, bemoaning our advancing age, and so much more. Kevin was often giving us ever helpful reminders to avoid volcanoes at all costs. Brent had some clever and utterly sublime puns. I would share my fascination with Uranus. The planet. And Paul would chime in with his clever retorts and friendly snark. So just to give you some context here, I mean, everybody has a long text thread with Paul. I scrolled back through mine as far as I could go without my computer crashing, and I got to September 21st. It was 4 months. I printed it to a PDF. It's 367 pages long. No shit. It is 450 megabytes in size, and that's just 4 months. So this is a lot of nonsense that we created over the years. But woven in there was some really heartfelt moments that I and the guys will treasure. We're talking about the developments in our lives and the important things that were happening to us. I mean, but mostly it was really dumb and really beautiful, and I will miss it terribly. But I digress. There are two kinds of people in this world. Those who've experienced the death of a very dear and close friend, and those who have not yet. Paul is the first really close friend of mine to die and to do it so suddenly and unexpectedly. I've experienced death before, of course. My mom, who loved Paul, passed away, and family members and friends of mine and their family members, and so many others. But each of those times, I either wasn't really super close to them, or you could kind of see it coming, you know, there was an illness or something. But this thing with Paul just fell out of the sky and whacked me on the head. I think with all of us, that's the case. So this is a first for me. This is the first close, dear friend to die. This is my first eulogy. This is the first time for me to look out at an audience of people, many of whom I know and others I hope to get to know, and see such profound sadness, to see the pain and the grief. So thanks a lot, Paul. Appreciate that. Learning opportunity. But the reality is he did teach me, and I think a lot of other people, so many first things. He was 2 years ahead of me at Trinity, and when he came back from San Francisco, or when he went to San Francisco, we kept in touch, writing back and forth letters, because that's what people did. And he had gone to work at a desktop publishing service bureau, and he told me about that. And so when I graduated from school, I found a job at a desktop publishing service bureau. Paul led the way for me into a career that I've worked in ever since. He was the first person to introduce me to journalism and writing. He recommended me to his editor in San Francisco at Publish Magazine. We both wrote computer reviews and crap like that was published all around the world in 27 languages. It's very surreal to see a Paul Johnson article in Russian, but it's out there somewhere. He was the first to embrace website design, first person I knew who did that, first person I knew that made a living writing about food. He was an early pioneer of digital photography, with the first to do the pop-up kitchen thing with his Red Beans Roadshow. He taught me about cooking, photography, a love of travel, of going to new places and meeting new people, being curious about the world around us and the people we share this world with. He was really good at that and so inspiring. Everybody loved Paul, and Paul loved everybody. I'd never seen a second line before last August when my son and I came to visit, and he took us to the Valley of Silent Men parade. It was another first for me. It was amazing. My son Alex and I watched, and we were just blown away. And there in the middle of it all was Paul running around the whole time, taking pictures, hugging people, doing his thing. I'm so thankful to have seen that. It was truly joyous. Y'all that live here are so fortunate to live in a city with such a rich and vibrant culture. Paul gave me my first weed gummy to help me sleep. I started a health kick last year, and he tried to get me to buy an Apple Watch so we could close our circles together, whatever the hell that is. But I refused because I knew I couldn't keep up with him. I think he walked 5 to 10 miles a day. He taught me patience and empathy and compassion, and he always had a kind word for people, most people. In the late 1990s, Kevin and I met up with him in Paris. He was escorting his grandfather, Leon, and his wife, Cricket, on a trip around Europe. Paul seemed very sweet and patient with them, but he later confessed that he probably would have murdered them both had Kevin and I not shown up to help him deal with the stress of carting two old people around Europe. So his patience definitely and empathy definitely had limits. In my adult life, time and again, Paul led the way. He created so many firsts. I don't think I ever really even noticed it at the time, but looking back as I have over the past few weeks, With this new perspective I have on my relationship with Paul, I can see it time and again. Paul led me and so many of us. He showed us the way to live and the way to love each other. It wouldn't be a proper eulogy without a quote from Maya Angelou, so here you go. She said, "People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Paul made us see the joy in life. He created a lot of that joy. He made us feel good about ourselves and about each other like nobody else I've ever known. And one last thing he taught me, never be the last one to leave a party. He sure wasn't. And he left this party, this big party, way too early. I'm going to miss him. Thank you, Paul.
So we're a full house, but please come on in. If there's an empty seat next to you, please raise your hand. So there's empty seats. We'll pause just for a moment. If you'd like to find a seat, please come on up. Yeah, take a seat on the floor if you'd like. Make it your home. Okay. Okay. Thank you, Ariana.
Hi everyone, I'm Ariana French. I knew Paul for over 25 years and we were married for a few of those. Paul would tell you when you were being a dumbass. It might not be at the time, depending on what kind of dumbass you were being, but he would find a way. He would, in a direct but loving way, tell you when you were out of your damn mind. Paul would be there if you needed him to be when a family member, maybe a parent, maybe a spouse, was making questionable decisions or being such a jerk that it drove you crazy. That kind of behavior that only close loved ones can bring out in you, turning you into whatever unhinged version of yourself you become when a loved one is being an asshole, as Paul would say. Paul would be there. He'd give you space to ugly cry and to cuss up a storm. And he'd find a way to make you laugh in between your hysterics. Paul would give you advice, if you asked for it, on how to handle a difficult situation, a situation that you wished you weren't in. Maybe it was a situation of your own making, or maybe you were just out of your depth. He wouldn't judge. Unless, of course, you were being a dumbass, in which case he would find a way to kindly point out your contributions to the matter. But his advice, always practical and always measured, would ring true. And if he didn't have advice to give you or that lived experience, he'd offer to connect you with someone who did, someone among his people, who he knew had faced a similar struggle. Paul would be there if you needed him to be when your loved one was dying. When my dad died, he was there. Through the night in a small hospital room in Lafayette, Louisiana, he was there with my mom and me, looking after us in all of the little and big ways that you need to be looked after when you're losing a loved one. 2 months later, after my dad died, Katrina hit New Orleans. And somehow Paul kept going. In all the little and big ways, he looked after all of us. He turned his church in St. Martinville into a refuge. And even as we were all spinning out with grief and with varying levels of coping skills and coping styles, he created a safe space for all of his people to mourn and be collectively messed up and to figure out whatever the hell we were supposed to do next. When I was thinking about what to share with you today, I really wanted to share with you stories about like how much Paul liked pie and how pie is superior to cake. which it is. It's a conviction we both shared. Or how his butt would do these little hydraulic moves when he did little dances around the kitchen. Or his almost religious devotion to caramelized onions. And as everyone here knows, there are so many stories of how he'd make you feel instantly welcome, and then make you smile and take the most incredible photo of you that you never thought possible, or make you laugh, or riff on a joke until you're just both rolling around with happy tears. And we can spend hours, and I hope we do, telling these stories. But I also wanted to tell you about the not so light stuff, about the Paul who would love you when you weren't that lovable. Through the dumbass times, the ugly crying times, the Katrina times, the death, and yes, the divorce times. Paul's community is strong because he celebrated those good times with us, and he saw us through those hard times, and always with a spirit of selfless love. So in texts and calls and voicemails and surprise visits and red beans and cornbread and hugs and photos and so much more, I'll miss how he showed up with that love again and again and again.
Good afternoon. I'm going to take a minute to take you back to the Black church, which we had a few minutes just before the service began with Aretha singing Amazing Grace. We have something there called call and response. And with that in mind, I've written my remarks about Pableaux. So first I'm going to have to teach you, except it's New Orleans, so I may not have to teach you, a little bit about call and response. So, when I say, Pableaux was my friend, I need you to reply in unison, Pableaux was my friend. So let's try it. Pableaux was my friend.
Pableaux was my friend.
One more time. Pableaux was my friend. I don't remember when I first met Pableaux. My first real impression of him was him sobbing on my neck at the Southern Foodways Alliance meeting in Oxford, Mississippi. It was a symposium following Hurricane Katrina, the first time that many folks had seen each other, and emotions were running high. We held on for dear life, or so it seemed, and bonded through tears and sadness and great loss. At the end of that time, Pableaux and I were linked for life. Pableaux was my friend. Over the years, I would learn that knowing Pableaux was sort of like trying to pick up water in your bare hands. He was mercurial and elusive, and at the same time remarkably present and involved. Easy to know, yet impossible to know fully. I met sisters, Charlotte and Elaine, and the second generations of his family, and heard more tales about far-ranging members whom he always seemed to be on the road visiting when he called. I'm on my road to Austin. I'm headed to Baton Rouge, or some other points he'd say in his phone calls that came to punctuate my life. Pableaux was my friend. One family member that he always honored was his grandmother, whose kitchen table became his locus for connection. His grandmother's table. That kind of ordinary, inanimate object became the vehicle that connected Pableaux with the world. The table needs feeding, he'd say, personifying the table and rendering it master, or should I perhaps say mistress, of his life. For it was through the table that Pableaux created his world, a world that was wider than even he expected, if the range and scope of the multiple obituaries memorializing him are to be considered. And also, through that world, Pableaux was my friend. He used that table and the simple dishes of red beans and rice and turkey gumbo that he served on it to create a community that was so much larger than the dishes served, the folks who sat around it, or even the photographs that he took of many of them. He created a community through that table that enlarged the world of New Orleans. He created and celebrated in his photographs and in his table communion a world that bridged the social apartheid that is oh so still in place in this city of New Orleans. Black and white joined at Pableau's table. Uptown, downtown, and back of town met at Pableau's table. All could and did meet at Pableau's table as equals, with only two caveats. Cell phone use was forbidden, and you had to bring what you're drinking. It was my honor to sit at that table often, and even to bring others to that table. All were enchanted, and all became part of that community, the Red Beans Communion. Pableaux was my friend. And I am oh so deeply saddened by the fact that I will no longer see the name Pableaux Johnson on my phone and answer it to hear his voice say, "Just checking on my peeps. How's the good doctor doing?" I will miss him greatly, but I rejoice in my knowing of him and in being able to say, Pableaux was my friend. Pableaux was our friend. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm here to say one more time, if you're in the back and you can't hear, please come up. You can fill the wings of the church. There's still some open seats, hands for open seats next to you. So there's even seats up front. Please feel free to come on up to the front. Okay? We'll hear another trumpet.
All right, Pableaux. Well, all right, we celebrating the life of our good friend, y'all. And I'm going to do a song called I'll Fly Away. So y'all sing along with me, all right?
All right, again, thank you, James. Please. Okay, first I'm going to bring up Brett Anderson. Many of you know Brett. Brett is a longtime friend of Pableau's. He reminded me just before the service that he and Pableaux moved to New Orleans just months apart. Then we'll hear from Tyrone Casby, who is the big chief of the Mohawk Hunters. We have Nicole Lazard, who knew Pableaux from the Second Line community. And then Gus Bennett, Pableau's photographer friend. So come on up, Brett.
Just before we start. I went to the emergency room just as soon as we'd heard that Pableaux was there. It was still not clear that our worst fears might be true, and I went to find out, hopefully, that they weren't. I also went because I was afraid that he might be alone. And of course he wasn't. This is Pableaux we're talking about. Look at this fucking room. His friends Freddie and Mike had ridden in a police car from the Second Line that followed the ambulance. And I learned once I got through security into the waiting room that the two of them had sat with Pableaux after he passed away. New Orleans Second Line tradition was obviously a part of Pableau's life. He died at a parade, as it was a part of Freddie's and Mike's life and a lot of the folks here gathered here today. Something I've always suspected, and that's only been reinforced by events of the past few weeks, is that people who attend a lot of jazz funerals understand something about grief that others do not. They know to confront it with everything that they've got, with their friends, with their people, all of them, in the full suite of their emotions, including joy. The first bolt of pain I felt as I sat down at the hospital trying to process this tragedy came from the recognition of how much of that crowdsourced emotional intelligence was contained in this friend of ours. I specifically and reflexively had this thought that Pableau's loss would be a lot easier to bear if only Pableaux were around to help me through it. You knew he would if he could. He was a caregiver, and that's something he got from his family. It wasn't too much later that I looked at my phone, and Pableau's image and the images he made were all but inescapable. The outpouring of sorrow and love was already swelling online, and it would only grow. Pableaux was gone and suddenly everywhere. Every one of Pableau's close friends that I've spoken to in the last few weeks, and I mean like not any exceptions here, has struggled to express what it feels like to realize that this friendship that they had, the centrality of it in their life, the specifics about the maintenance of it, the intensity of it, the photography that came out of it, that damn near everyone they have ever known and a bunch of people they'd never met had the exact same relationship with the same guy. This is plainly a beautiful thing, that one person could nurture so much intimacy. But I know I'm not speaking just for myself when I say that it's also a little bit perplexing. How did he find the time? And even a little bit unsettling. Pableau's blast radius really came into focus if you live in New Orleans and went to one of the Second Lines in his honor. Pableau's blast radius really came into focus if you live in New Orleans and went to one of the Second Lines in his honor. Pableau's blast radius really came into focus if you live in New Orleans and went to one of the Second Lines in his honor. taking one of these parades, which was, I mean, blocks of people loving on Pableaux, strangers, people you've met. Taking all of that in, Sue Chiaravalo, one of Pableau's old friends, said, "I feel like I'm finding out that he was cheating on me." Sue's just one of the people, countless people I've talked to over the past month about Pableaux. It was a way to work through the hurt and also try to puzzle through what explains this, and the outpouring. What was the thing about Pableaux? Our friend Michael Oates Palmer from Los Angeles provided an answer of sorts. And I'd like to read just a short thing that he wrote. This is Michael Oates Palmer. "The thing about Pableaux Johnson and his inexhaustible gift for friendship and unquenchable love for connection is not that you had to share it with what sometimes felt like all of humanity. It was that somehow he made you feel that you didn't, that you were the biggest priority." I've been learning all sorts of stuff about Pableaux that I'd never really thought of much before. For instance, I'm told he once had a full head of hair. His friend Chris Poche, who became friends with him back in the mid-90s, back when it was Paul, I still think that's weird. Chris met him through his wife Georgia by way of Annie Etheridge and Will Bates, who were core friends of Pableau's back in Cajun country. Chris told me about these parties that they'd have. I think they were called second childhood parties, and where they'd drink margaritas and drive around dune buggies on the muddy banks of a bayou. And then when that was done, they'd play, and these are not my words, bitch slap Uno, which a game that Chris helpfully explained is Uno but violent. I moved to New Orleans in 2000 to take a job writing for the local newspaper as a restaurant critic. And Pableaux and Ariana arrived not long after I did. He was mainly a food writer then, and an excellent one. As a Louisianan and a quick study, naturally, he also knew a lot more about what I had yet to learn about eating in New Orleans. And his generosity about that kept me from making a lot of embarrassing mistakes early in my career. And he continued to provide that sort of service to people, including journalists, up until the very end. We ended up connecting on a lot of levels. We were both children of divorce. We were transplants here. We both loved to laugh, and he was really funny. We were together at the Croix de Vue parade early on in our friendship, like 2002, 2003, something like that. And that's a walking parade that happens early in the Mardi Gras season. It runs through the Marigny, this neighborhood, in fact. And it rolled just last weekend. And the parade is known for, among other things, for being obscene, a little bit obscene. And at one point, a woman who was marching in the parade and who wasn't wearing a whole lot approached and started to dance with me in this suggestive manner that erased the physical space between us. And when that was over, the woman put a Mardi Gras throw in my hand, this little gift that people in Mardi Gras parades hand out. I know I don't have to tell you a lot of you guys that, but it was just this like rubbery little gremlin-y blob of a thing, and I was just like, and I turned to Pableaux, and I'm like, what is this? And without missing a beat, he goes, the clap. by this time, the Monday Red Beans were up and running at Ariana and Pablo's place on Magazine Street. I was not conscious then of how lucky I was to have moved to this city where I knew a grand total of one person at the same time as this guy. And you know, the friend making that you do when you move to a new place is essential if you want to be happy when you move to a new place, right? And it's hard work, and so arduous some people never move, you know. I basically outsourced half of that to Pableaux, and he did that for just countless people, you know, over the years. Our friend Brett Martin moved here in 2011, and he was about to turn 40. He knew hardly anyone, and he remembered the situation this way. Someone could have told me, "Don't worry that you're past the age of making friends. There's this guy. He's going to introduce you to everyone in town. You will have family. There's one condition. He's going to give you a lot of delicious food." This goes on and on. Scott Andreessen met Pablo at a Muses party, Muses Parade party back in 2014. "Tell me everything and don't leave anything out," is what he said by way of introduction. I'm sure you guys have heard that before. He went on to eat at Pablo's grandmother's table more than any other table other than his own or his parents'. Ashley Graham and Pablo were dear friends. Starting kind of when Ashley lived around the corner from Pablo. And when she left that place around the corner from Pablo, she literally only looked at rentals within a mile radius of Pablo's house for fear of losing her spot in the Red Beans rotation. I asked friends if they thought that Pablo had a type of person who he'd bring into his life. There were so many. No one agreed exactly, but everyone used the word passion. People who were committed to something. When it came to the Red Beans table, there was also, as Wayne Curtis put it, stray sheep. People who had just moved to town or gone through a breakup. In other words, people who could use a friend. Pablo really ran toward the fire when it came to his friend's heartbreak. Some of you others have alluded to that. He was always going to funerals. Matt Sakakini said his friendship with Pablo really deepened when Matt was going through a divorce. Matt knew Pablo was wired to help in hard times because of how he operated when everything was fine. Pablo was the kind of friend who, after just going out for a routine round of drinks, would send Matt messages like, "You don't know how much you mean to me." Pablo himself was vulnerable. He had deep insecurities, Sarah Rowan told me. And she continued, one of the reasons relationships with him were so deep was because he was willing to admit that. Pablo was like family to a lot of us. And as there is in families, there could be occasional conflict. There was the night he smashed Wayne's phone for violating a Red Beans table law. And he and I had our little tiffs. I wasn't always in the mood for visitors, for instance, all those times he dropped by the house unannounced. And we'd have these countless one-on-one conversations that would go late into the night. We were kind of pseudo-roommates for a while after Katrina. Sometimes when making an appointment for such an occasion, he said, I need to check my mirrors, which was a Pabloism in this instance, really, for I may end up staying long enough to sleep in the guest room. I'd make a salad. It was a manly salad, but I'd make salads. And we'd drink wine and switch to beer and we'd listen to records. And when we were deep into it, he would say this thing with a bit of an edge in his voice. I'm not normal, people. This would happen when he sensed I wasn't being honest with myself about myself, and that was impeding our connection in the moment. You could admit that you're scared or hurt or proud, he was basically saying. I'm not going to judge you. You can't love without worrying, and we worried about Pableaux. I suggested to him on more than one occasion that maybe a multi-week, multi-state road trip may not be the antidote to every one of life's challenges. I also sometimes he wished he could have redirected a bit of the energy that he committed to his friendships and his creative projects to, like, making money, for instance. I've thought a lot about this, actually. We've learned a lot in these past weeks. From the outpouring obits in the New York Times and The Economist, literally international news. Second lines like he's fat fucking domino. Given all that, I think it's a lot harder to maintain that he lived irresponsibly. We know his generosity circled back. The house where he lived over the past dozen years or so is owned by Ann Cashin, a dear old friend and something of a Pableaux Project benefactress. Some of you also know that Ann had planned to move into that house and that Pableaux was going to have to move out. Not long ago, Ann had told Pableaux that she planned to give him that house, that he would inherit it. And he was pleased about that. There were nights Pableaux made that house feel like a refuge. Ariana used that word. As she mentioned, this is a gift I first noticed in sort of an intense way during Hurricane Katrina, when they had that church in St. Martinville that was a living space. And they created a community there, a literal sanctuary for New Orleanians. A lot of you folks here were there, I'm sure. I evacuated to Oxford, Mississippi before, in advance of Katrina, a place that Pableaux felt at home and drew a lot of inspiration from, thanks largely to the Southern Foodways Alliance and a lot of the people there. I caravanned up there with our friend Cynthia Joyce. And after 4 or 5 days, we caravanned together back to Louisiana to Pableau's church. And I remember feeling so good that day, knowing where we were going. It was light out, it was the beautiful weather. I mean, it was like, that I felt good is a little bananas, but I felt good that day. And about halfway there, Cynthia calls and says, you know, we got to talk. So we need to pull over. And I'm like, okay. We get to this parking lot, and she tells me I've been driving too fast. She also sensed in my giddy zeal to get to Pableaux and his gumbo a detachment from the gravity of the situation we were in, and I think it alarmed her. Something I'd yet to learn about Katrina, and that I think Cynthia was anticipating, is that it would consume all our bandwidth, draining the emotional resources each of us would need to navigate all the other stuff that life throws at you. Katrina broke Pableaux a little bit, as it did a lot of people. But over time, it also refocused him, as Chris and others have pointed out, on New Orleans' core culture and the people it displaced. It set him on the path to become the artist that he became, an artist whose medium is community, as Wayne aptly put it. Excuse me. I felt some of that Katrina dread in the hospital, to be honest. This is the 20th anniversary year. And if you'll excuse me a bit of gross understatement, it's been pretty shitty so far. As I scrolled from my phone that day, not wanting to respond to anyone, not wanting to confirm it was true, I thought, we can't handle this. Not this, not Pableaux. Pableaux and I both, to put it how he would put it, loved us some Willie Nelson. Willie has this great lyric. It's not something you get over, but it's something you get through. Pableaux is going to help us get through his death because of the way that he lived. We'll never stop missing him, but that will be just a little bit easier. Remembering what I know, what you know, what we all know with absolute certainty, which is this: he misses us too.
Good afternoon. Pableaux Johnson. You know, the character of a man, they say, can be measured at his funeral. So the character of Pableaux is really great if you look around this room. So for Pableaux, how about just do this? Hey. Everyone, all of the previous speakers met Pableaux and Paul. All I met was Pableaux, and he called me Chief. And to be here today is really an honor to me in the New Orleans masking culture, because Pableaux was there no matter what. And I met him through the lens. Someone talked about his camera. That's how I actually met him, through his lens. And he got up close. And up close in the Mardi Gras Indian culture and tradition is almost like taboo. But he got up close, but what he had was a personality that's beyond measure. And when Pableaux took our pictures, and I'm talking about every masked Indian in this city, I guarantee you he had photos of them in his, wherever it is right now. Okay? But honestly, he was that type of person. And when I met Pableaux, we call Super Sundays, because on Mardi Gras Day, the Mohawk hunters, whom I'm the chief of, we don't come on the East Bank. We stay on the West Bank of the river, so I don't get to see him. But on Super Sunday, he would be the first photographer there to say, can I take a picture? Not just start snapping pictures and getting all in your space. He'd ask you first, out of respect. And I really took that to heart. And like I say, not only myself, but other masking Indians. And I can't speak for everybody, but I can speak for me. The Pableaux I know was a great man. And as I heard his brother emphasize Paul, and some of the other speakers talk about who and what he was, I feel like I've known him all my life. And this is a very short life. I'm half of what I'm gonna be. I'm 72, so I'll be 144. Okay, let's work with that. But Pableaux was that kind of person. And right before, maybe a couple months ago, he accepted an award, or he got awarded for being a photographer beyond measure, I call it. And he was going to be recognized in the state of Louisiana for that. And nobody talked about it much in the newspaper. But it should be known that his pictures and his photos came from his heart. I walked up to him one day and I said, look, Pableaux, you've taken a lot of pictures of me and my grandkids. We had got a little stipend from somewhere. And I said, can I buy some film? He looked at me like I stepped on his toes. I said, Pableaux, I'm just asking. No, never, because that's from my heart. And from that point on, I felt good about him being around the Mardi Gras Indian culture and tradition because he was sincere. Some folks we call culture vultures because they come take your picture and then the next thing you know you're on a billboard somewhere and they're selling it. I've never seen none of his photos out there like that. And so I respect that. And I have a letter that I wrote to the organization which was putting on for the award that he was nominated for, and one of the letters was the nomination. So I'm gonna read the nomination letter I sent. And when he was accepted into that, I said, I might be a great writer, Pablo, you got accepted, I don't know. But, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't have my reading glasses, but I'm gonna try my best to read this letter to you because when I wrote it with sincerity. You know, sometimes somebody asks you to write a recommendation, and you say, okay, yeah, Johnny was a good boy, Ricky, da-da-da-da-da, and you, yeah. I see. And it went like this. To whom it may concern, on behalf of the New Orleans Mardi Gras Indian Council, the Mohawk Hunters Incorporated, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to Mr. Pableaux Johnson for his incomparable courage and commitment to New Orleans Mardi Gras Indian culture, while furthering his knowledge with the local culture, Okay, I'm sorry. But you know, I got to laugh because, you know, Pablo would laugh. He would. He always had a grin on his face. No matter what he was doing, he was just a grinning. But anyway, while furthering his knowledge with the local cultural arts, Pablo's photography and assistance in maintaining this very unique cultural experience through pictures has had a lasting impact on the individuals and community that he has photographed over the years. Pableaux has been extremely valuable because of his interpersonal skills and personality, which enhances his ability to interact with the culture and maintain a great respect for the secrecy and rituals of the New Orleans Mardi Gras Indians. And that was him. No matter what, he maintained our culture, he maintained our rituals, and he was always there. In fact, he started coming to the West Bank to the Algiers Super Sunday because he felt comfortable, and we always made him feel at home. And in Algiers, we have a way of saying, you know, we all family. So when he would come over on the West Bank, we also made sure he ate. Now, he ate some red beans and rice, his staple, but he also liked my mother-in-law's gumbo. He ate the gumbo. But on behalf of the New Orleans black masking culture here, I just want to say to the family, thank you for loaning us Pablo. You know, he was an angel. You know, there's angels that come among us. And in my opinion, he was an angel. He came, he did his job, and then he went home. So as I go to my seat, all of our tradition, from the Mardi Gras Indian perspective, we start with a prayer. And we would say, before we go out on the streets on Mardi Gras morning, it's called Indian Red. Mare kuriga payo, Indian Red, Indian Red. Mare kuriga payo, Indian Red, Indian Red. In that call and response, I'm gonna do two things and I'm leaving. I don't know, but I've been told the streets in heaven is paved with gold. If you get to heaven before I do, bore me a hole and pull me through. Thank you.
I can't follow behind none of those people. God. Oh, my name is Nicole Lazard, and I'm one of the second liners. And the lady said that Pablo was my friend, but Pablo was my personal photographer. And I say mine, yes, mine, because every time I turn around, that camera was in my face. So I remember the first time that I met him. I was getting out my car, getting my stuff together, and I turned around. Bang! It's right there in my face. And I'm like, who is this man all in my face? And he said, I know you, you don't know me. You the uptown girl. And that's because I wore this on the back of my collar when I paraded downtown. So I also remember, anytime that he would miss my parade, because I paraded like 6 times a season for 2 seasons, so he had so many photos of me. People would say, I guess you're his favorite. I say, no, not really. I just parade a lot. That's all it is. So my daughter had an accident like 2 years ago, and he had invited me over to his house to eat red beans, but I couldn't make it. So I say, Pablo, I can't make your red beans. My daughter's in a coma in the hospital. He said, no problem, uptown girl. And he brought my red beans to my house. I say, hold the cornbread. I don't like cornbread. Oh, no, you got to have the cornbread. You got to have the cornbread. I said, but I don't like cornbread. We fussing about the cornbread. I don't like the cornbread. But guess what? I took the cornbread. I enjoyed the cornbread. I enjoyed the cornbread. And I say this to say, you know, all of us second line people, y'all stand up. Stand up. Everybody at parade, stand up. Stand up. I know there's going to be more of us out there, but every last one of them can vouch. We coming out the door. That's the way he is. So I just want to say, rest on, my friend. Rest on. My personal photographer.
Forgive me, I need my glasses, Chief. So for those of you who know me personally, you know I'm always in black. Me and Pablo say dress in black so you can disappear and won't be a part of the scene. I always have a camera if I'm speaking or if I'm just talking. I keep a camera. I go to church with cameras. And I always put it on the floor because it can't fall off the floor. I speak in metaphors a lot, and I also live the life of a photographer in everything I do. So the piece that I have presented in front of me, I started writing it the moment that I knew Pablo passed away. It was the only day that I stayed home, and it was part because of 3 people, my 2 friends here, one my former student, Dana King and Tracy Whitsett. They're like my angels, so when they see me in danger, they walk with me all the time. And Pablo was also an angel. And Pablo would observe me through his camera. We would always, every now and then, see each other line to sight through the lens. And if I looked like I was having an issue, he knew, because on the other side of that 70 to 200 lens, he saw I was in distress. So I write this from the perspective of a photographer and as a friend and as a culture bearer. But before I read it, let me give you a basic, quick, foundational how I got into photography. And this is not about me, but it will add some insight to how I got the words to talk about Pablo. My mother had a degree in theology. And I told my mother one time I wanted to become a photographer, and I believe I was 6 years old. And through her degree in theology and her understanding of religion and spiritual things, she said, okay. She purchased a camera with everything. The only thing she could not afford was light, the studio light or the flash units. She said, go outside in the garden and take pictures. And my mom spoke in the third person all the time. We know how it is. Mama can't teach you photography. But take this camera and go outside and photograph the garden. There was one problem with that. I did not like flowers. So photographing flowers was an issue for me. And I came back inside and said, Mom, I don't like this. I like photography, but I don't like photographing flowers. So she said, go and find some people and put them in a garden. Now keep in mind, these things
5, 6-year-old kid sounds random, but remember what I said, it's coming from a person with a background in theology. So for her to tell me, go into a garden and then find people and put them in it and photograph them, it becomes much bigger. And at the time I didn't know it. It was only until I graduated from high school that I put it together, because I was still taking pictures. And the idea of making the image correct again and shooting people in a garden that we destroyed a long time ago and we're still trying to get it right became profound. So photography to me was always about image and image identity. And it was also important to me that if a picture was worth taking, it was also worth remembering the story and the situation that created that image. Because I can show you a million pictures and they're all beautiful, but the story adds something magical to it. So the name of this piece is called simply A Tribute to Pableaux Johnson. If a picture is worth 1,000 words, then what can be said about the photographer who created that image? A photographer does not simply capture moments. If they do it right, they reveal the truth. They preserve legacies, and they show us the beauty in ourselves that we sometimes seem to forget. Today, the image that called all of us here today is the image of Pableaux Johnson. And through our reflections, we have already spoken over 1,000 words. Pableaux was everyone's friend. He shared personal stories with everyone, and today we share those stories with each other. We share stories of laughter, tears, and reflections on our life and his life well lived. The beauty about Pableaux, none of these words came up today. These words were earned in his lifetime. He heard everyone tell him the words that we said today. Those words shaped the way Pableaux lived by his kindness, his artistry, and his presence in our community. You see, Pableaux was not just a photographer as some might imagine photography. He was a witness. He saw us. He saw the soul of this city. He saw the spirit of its people and the depths of the tradition. Through his lens, he documented not only what was, but he documented what could be. Our strength, our struggles, our joy, and our resilience. His work was a gift to all of us. It was a mirror reflecting the love and the dignity we carry within us. There was a time when I wasn't feeling at my best. My equilibrium was off at a second line. And I was taken directly from the second line to the hospital. And again, those are my two angels right there who watch over me at the second line. When I returned back to the second line with my camera in hand, ready to shoot, Pableaux greeted me. And if you know Pableaux, there's two ways he can greet you. One with a handshake, or with a quick, rapid, paparazzi style, and you go, whoa, Pableaux, give me a break. Well, he greeted me with the rapid fire photo set, and then with a handshake and with a hug. I knew at that moment that I was amongst family. Then he asked me, Gus, what are you trying to do? We don't want you to pass away at a second line. And I remember telling Pableaux, and only a photographer can make this statement. So the photographers in the room, I know you can understand, especially living in New Orleans. I say, Pableaux, if I should leave this place at a second line, then I'm good with that. just make sure you take the picture. I don't want a picture with an iPhone or Android because it's going to make me look fat and fluffy. And we laughed, and he gave me the biggest hug. He squeezed me so hard, the oil in my nose came out. Pableaux was always watching everyone. He was always caring, and he always showed his love for the people that he observed through his lens. Our last conversation, our last moment was about the second line. And I think I asked the question, what would happen if the second line suddenly stopped in this city? And we both pondered the answer to that simple yet difficult question. Neither one of us at the time had a definitive answer, and then I just threw it on the table. I said, Pableaux, if the second lines would suddenly stop, then the shadows of every person that ever danced on the streets of this city would suddenly rise and dance. The memory of those people would dance forever from sunup to sundown. And again, if I reflect on what my mother used to tell me from a theological perspective, the idea of shadows was an evil thing. But the shadows that I'm talking about are shadows that come from light, pure light. Because in order to produce a shadow, you need light. Shadows cannot exist in darkness. So Pableaux, this is your time to dance in the sun. You have now met your sunset, and we will remember you. We will keep your memory alive, one second line at a time, one photo at a time. We can never replace you. We can only add one pixelated brick to a photographic wall that you and many other great photographers in this city laid the foundation for. For your work, your vision, and your love for this city will forever be a foundation for all of us who follow in your footsteps. And I'm almost positive that someone will mention your name. Your light will rise again on someone. Someone will remember your kindness. Someone will see an image that you created and smile, because the light from that image will always be present, because true light never dies and true light never goes away. And to all my photographers who are present, we are the keepers of light. As photographers, we are the custodians of light. We give responsibility to the shadows, to the highlights, and to the gray tones. And if we do it right, we leave people with an indelible image that will hopefully change their lives. We have the power to make people smile, to make them laugh, to make them angry, and make them reflect. My mother used to make me repeat these simple words: our, us, our, us, our, we, those, us, and us. Those words reflect reverence, provision, forgiveness, expectation, and deliverance. Those words are not new to any one of us. Those are the key words from the model prayer. And every time I step out on the street, that's the chant I say to myself. It is always about the our, the us, the our, the us, the we, the those, to the us, and to the us. So as we all move forward, from this day, let us always remind ourselves that we are always in the process of creating an image of ourselves. And we should always be mindful of what that image is, because everyone will meet that final sunset. And it does matter, and it will matter, what words will they say about you when you meet your sunset. Pableaux, you brought clarity to the marginalized, to the unseen, and to the magic of this city. Rest in peace, my friend. We will miss you.
All right, thank you, Gus, and thank you to all the speakers. Another round of applause. We're going to bring James Andrews back to send us out.
Thank you. One more time, y'all, for Pableaux. Yeah, and we're gonna give him a real traditional New Orleans send-off. Y'all bought your dancing shoes? And I'm gonna do a tribute to Pableaux right here. I'm gonna do a song, and I love this acoustic. Oh, it's wonderful, the acoustic. I'm gonna do a song called St. James Infirmary. And I'm gonna play it some kind of way like the old timers in the church with this acoustics.